Hello, hello, hello. Welcome,
Hello.
everybody. Hello, welcome to this new session on automating your Bicep templates with GitHub Actions. My name is Gitte. I work as an engineer in the Fast Track for Azure team at Microsoft. And we help our customers with deploying their applications on the Azure platform. I'm in the app dev team, helping out with things like Azure Kubernetes Service, app services, but also a lot of DevOps, a lot of continuous integration, continuous deployment, and also a lot of infrastructure as code. That's also why I love this series so much and why I love these Learn Live sessions so much. And today I'm joined as a co-host by David. Hi, David.
Hello, Gitte. Hello. Yeah, my name is David Passera. I work as a cloud and DevOps architect in DevOps Team mCloud, which is a Microsoft partner. Before that, I spent almost 7 wonderful years at Microsoft, working as a senior cloud solution architect based out of Norway. And yeah, we share the same passion for infrastructure as code, for GitHub, Bicep, all that goodness. So I'm happy to be with you and talk about this exciting Learn module.
Yeah, it's all the good things coming together, right? All the good things like on automation coming together. Today's session is going to be about reusable Bicep code and how to publish that with GitHub Actions. Um, it's part of an entire series. And this Learn Live session, just so you know, like we're live streaming this one, and we also have a moderator available for you today as well. That's going to be Nelly. So hi, Nelly. She'll be watching in the back, and she'll be answering any questions you may have during this live stream. So in case you have any question, in case anything pops up in your mind with regards to the content that we'll be talking about today, of course, you can always ask the question to Nelly. She might even get the question through to us, and then we can actually answer the question for you live during this session. So we'd love this to be a very live and interactive session. Use that chat, say hi to Nelly. She'll be very happy to help you out and to answer any of your questions that you may have. So cool. And today's session is going to be about reusable Bicep code. Yeah, as always, there is a Learn module associated with this one as well, where you can follow along. So the link is on the screen, aka MS Learn Live. You can also use a QR code in case you want to. And like we'll be talking through slides, we'll also be doing demos. Now, one pointer, if you want to follow along with the demos or with the exercises, David, you did set up some things beforehand, right?
That is correct. So to save some time, I won't show you all the process, the entire process of setting the environment, all the credentials, etc. I will just give you a quick walkthrough of the end state, so you do some kind of health check if your environment, if you are following with us, is in that desired state. Yeah.
Yeah, and actually that setup of because it's like the setup of the connectivity of the GitHub Actions workflow or the GitHub environment towards the Azure environment. All of that is done by using what is called a workload identity. We have a specific episode on that is actually part of this series as well, which is episode 2. And in episode 2, we explain in depth what a workload identity is, how you can set it up. So in case you don't know anymore or you want more background information, I would say have a look at that episode 2. It was aired, I think, 4 weeks ago or something. There's a recording of that one as well, so you can actually look at all the details there. Yeah, very happy to have you following along today as well. And for today's module, the objectives that we have today is it's going to be about concepts like Bicep modules and template specs. So we'll talk a lot about modules and template specs. Now, what are these? They are means for getting reusability inside of your Bicep templates. Now, template specs and modules themselves, we have modules or Learn modules that go into depth of these as well. What we will be mainly talking about today and what the Learn objectives for today will actually be automating those template specs or the publishing of the template specs and the publishing of those Bicep modules. So basically, the focus will again be on GitHub Actions, not necessarily on how you write template specs and how you write the Bicep modules. We'll also talk about some additional things like versioning your template specs and modules. And we'll also talk about some good practices in the last part of this session. So yeah, you can use then those good practices in your own way of working as well. And David, like this session, because we talk about reuse and talk about publishing these things, it's different than what we've been doing up till now, right? Up till now in the series, what we've been doing is putting template specs or putting Bicep templates actually in a Git repository, but this is something entirely different, right?
It is indeed. So here we are not really talking about, hey, I want to not go away from a large Bicep template to separate modules that would be stored locally in my Git repo. I really want to spread the love and share my awesome Bicep code with the rest of the world or with the rest of the organization in most of the cases. So this is really a different scenario than just having a modularized approach for my Bicep code inside a single repo. That's correct.
Yeah, and like the big difference is like when storing the templates in the Git repository, that's all about collaboration, like everybody collaborating together on that Bicep template, while this is about publishing and reuse is what we'll be talking about today, right? And you see also a banner at the bottom of the screen. If you want to know more about the template specs and about Bicep modules, this is the previous Learn series that we did on those specific Bicep concepts. So you can actually check it out there as well in the Learn Live IAC and Bicep Learn event. Cool. So as for an intro, yeah, first thing you need to know, and again, in this session, I won't go into full detail of template specs and modules, but what you do need to know is, and we will explain some differences between the two of them, because that's still important for this session as well. But that's the big thing here, reuse will be like the keyword of what we'll be trying to do, right? The sample solution or the example scenario that we'll be talking about in this session will actually be like, well, suppose you're the administrator of a toy company. You've heard this a lot in each and every session that we did. You're an administrator of a toy company.
Who doesn't love toys, right?
Who doesn't love toys? Exactly. And your use of Azure is expanding. Yeah. So you've got like a new cloud governance approach, and you want to make sure that all your deployments or a lot of the deployments that you do, that they follow the good practices for security and reliability inside of your templates. Yeah. Now, to make this easier for your colleagues, what you've done is you've created a set of security hardened Bicep files, both as template specs and as modules. And now what you want to do is you want to get these published, but in such a way that these template specs and modules can also still evolve. And that while these are evolving, that you have a regular process around it, where in that process, you're also able to validate that the template specs and the modules that you're writing, that they are also up to par with what you want them to be. So we'll be talking about, hey, what's a good then GitHub Actions workflow that you can use to actually publish these template specs and modules. That's basically what this session will be about. Cool. So then, how do you do that? How do we get these into a deployment workflow? Now, first of all, what I do want to talk to you about is like the difference between template specs and between modules, because there is a difference between them. Yeah, otherwise we wouldn't have two different things. And what you need to keep in the back of your mind, without going into all of the details of each of them, is that template specs, they are more like a full solution. Think of a template spec as, hey, I have this situation, this use case where I have to deploy a lot of web applications with a backend database. That's a very common scenario that I see with customers as well. They have a web app and a database. And when I deploy these, that combination, I want to deploy it in a certain way. I want to, for instance, when the web app talks to the database, I always want to integrate in my virtual network and then call into the database through a private link connection, for instance. So I don't need use any of the public IP addresses. It's all in my private network that the communication is happening. Also, very common scenario. Now, for that scenario, that use case, it makes total sense to actually create a template spec out of that. Because then each time when someone in your company needs a web app with backend database, if they deploy it based on that template spec, it's deployed in exactly the same way. The parameters might be different, yeah, but the base setup where you go through the virtual network into the private link to the database is exactly the same for all of the web apps and databases that you deploy. So template spec, think solution. Think multiple service and you want to set them up in a certain way.
An interesting fact, if I can just chip in, about template specs is that they actually predate Bicep. So they were created as an answer to a very sort of difficult way how you could publish ARM templates without having a need to have a staging area, which typically was a blob storage with a public endpoint. So if you remember linked ARM templates,
they were a pain. They were a true pain.
They were a pain. So a template spec is really just your template, but it's deployed directly in your Azure environment in a resource group, and you can just point to it from your deployment pipeline or from your CLI if you don't do it through a pipeline. So I think that's interesting to know. We don't want to confuse people with having two options, but template specs are, like you said, for complete solutions, and they are actually predating Bicep as a DSL.
They are actually a very good solution for that problem that we had in the past, where you had to upload all of those linked ARM templates to a storage account, and those gave me a headache. So this can actually take the folder that holds your main Bicep file and just upload it all to the template spec. Now, modules, on the other hand, there you shouldn't think solution. For a module, you should rather think like how you set up one service, but not always one service, because it sometimes can be a bit more. But basically, like one use case is, for instance, recently I created a templates for deploying a big solution as well. But the big solution, I split it up in different modules. Like I had a module for the virtual network. I had a module for the database setup. I had a module for how I wanted the application gateway to be set up. And I had a module for the key vault. Yeah. So each of these different pieces, they were all a module. And a module is more like, hey, how do you want a certain service to be set up with like the default settings, for instance? Think, for instance, an Azure Kubernetes service. Yeah. If you deploy it with all the default settings, that's not really an enterprise-ready Kubernetes service. You want to tweak those settings a bit. And that's where a module can be very handy, where you say, hey, I create a module with all the things I want to have for every AKS cluster in my full setup. And then when people need to set up a Kubernetes service, then they can take this, they can take that module, and they actually have a good like default to start from for your specific situation. Yeah. And then actually, David, if you look at template specs and modules, basically you could use a module in a template spec, right?
Yeah, so it's more like a chicken and egg problem, or it could be. But the idea is that, like you said, modules are like a components or building blocks, and then you have a spec, which is like a complete solution that can leverage those building blocks to provide your internal customers, your DevOps teams with a this is a blueprint, and I can just inject some parameters, and I will get a complete solution set up in my Azure environment.
Exactly. And that's actually a nice parallel that you draw there. Like the Bicep module are like the Lego blocks, where the template spec is more like the house, basically. Yeah. So that's how you can compare. Now, David, maybe like when you now are creating these template specs and you're creating these modules, suppose you want to automate the publishing of them. What are like valid steps that you would take in a GitHub Actions workflow? So can you talk us through this slide?
Absolutely. So thinking about the previous sessions where you learned about how to deploy, then it was enhanced with the testing part. You would wonder what kind of steps with regards to validation are applicable in this reuse scenario. So we have linting, absolutely applicable here, because you still need to have some check whether your code is syntactically correct. And of course, linter also gives you some hints regarding some recommended practices. Then the second step is a pre-flight validation. And that's a bit special one. So first of all, you need a real Azure environment in order to do a pre-flight. So you actually need to mimic a deployment to that environment, which means that you need to have that environment available. You need to have a workload identity to actually test this pre-flight or run this pre-flight. But you also need to provide parameter values in order for the deployment to sort of do that complete validation. So for that reason, in some scenarios, you might still do that. In this Learn module, we are not actually using pre-flight, but some people still prefer that. It does some extra validation. For instance, is my target subscription, does it have enough quota for resources that I might be using in that Bicep deployment? Or, am I deploying to a region where this service might not be available? Or with regards to global, globally unique names for resources, am I actually good there, or I'm using some name that is actually taken? So the pre-flight makes sense, but again, you would not be deploying those resources to a real environment. You want to publish them. So I would say it's up to you to decide whether you want to use pre-flight or not. And then, of course, you have a deploy to test. So if you really want to stretch it and do the actual deployment before you publish, and then you want to test, you can use some testing frameworks like Pester to say, okay, all those resources that I declared in my Bicep, I can actually check whether they are in that environment and whether they have the properties that I declared. You can do that, but again, it's more complex. So in this module, we try to make this publishing pipeline, validation and publishing pipeline, quite simple.
And basically, when you would, for instance, do the deploy to test step in your workflow, in that case, like, common sense would be that after you've deployed it to test and you tested some things out, that you also destroy it again, right? It's not like, because this is about publishing the reusable artifacts. It's not about actually deploying these reusable artifacts, because that will actually come next once people start using your artifacts, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, that makes a lot of sense as potential steps in your GitHub workflow. And specifically the linting makes a lot of sense to just double check that everything is as it should be inside of that Bicep template spec or inside of the module. With regards to go ahead.
There was one more step that you could think of in the from the previous sessions, like what about the what if? Does it make sense to run it here? So again, what is the purpose of what if validation? You're checking the actual state in Azure against your declared template, but we are not really deploying to a real Azure environment. So that is why we didn't include what if in this pipeline or workflow, because from this point of view, it doesn't really make sense. We want to publish to a different place than the Azure itself, even though with template specs, it's sort of publishing to Azure, but or in both scenarios, but we will talk about that more.
Yeah, and again, like the what if makes sense after the publishing once someone starts using your template spec, but not at the time of publishing. That makes a lot of sense indeed. If you want to know more about the testing of your Bicep code, we also had a previous session on that one. So the link for that one is on the slide. So yeah, go check it out if you want to know more about those different steps and you want to go more in depth on those. One thing you'll also need when you want to publish those template specs and you want to publish those modules, uh, you'll be publishing two. For the template specs, you'll be publishing to a template spec inside of a resource group in Azure. Yeah. For a module, you'll be publishing to a container registry. Now, in case you do that from your command line, like in the previous sessions we did on template specs and on modules, in that case, when you did the command line, you just used your own credentials. You did AZ login and you were logged into your Azure environment and you could push and do those things. In this case, we'll be pushing or publishing from a GitHub Actions workflow. So, which is kind of like headless. It's like you'll be running that from an agent machine. And in that case, you can't just use any AZ login and you can't use a regular user account to publish those artifacts. In this case, you'll need to use something else. And either you use the old way, which was with service principals, and then you had the client ID and the password inside of your GitHub repository. But the newer way of authenticating is through a workload identity. Yeah. This is that episode 2 of this series, where we talk all about the workload identity. In this case, the principle is exactly the same. You create a workload identity. There's no credentials going back and forth or needing to be stored in your GitHub repository. It's all being configured in your Active Directory, Azure Active Directory. And what you actually need, the workload identity, if you take the principle of least privilege, in that case, you'll, if you need to do a template spec publication, you only need to have permissions on that resource group. For the container registry, then you need the ACR push permission towards the container registry, and that's about it, right? Now, David, this is about the publishing again. So if you now want to use it, these template specs and modules, you need, again, different credentials, right?
Exactly right. So if I'm a consumer, you are so nice to publish some modules to me. If I'm a consumer, I have my own repo and my own pipeline or workflow. I need to have my own workload identity so the pipeline can authenticate towards Azure and consume, read. At least you need a read write. You don't need to write to the template specs. You need to read and then just deploy to your subscription, your resource group, depending on the scope. So
Yeah,
you need
exactly.
to be mindful about publisher and subscriber or consumer side.
The consumer side, let's call it. But because that's the thing, like this image you see on the slide, there's actually a whole world on the right-hand side of that image that actually then talks about, hey, how are we now consuming these template specs? So indeed, you need to be able to fetch them, and then you need to be able to deploy them to your environment, which might be totally different from where you get these specs or modules from.
Mm-hmm.
Now, to publish a template spec, if you do that command line, you might have seen in the previous in one of the previous sessions that there's an Azure CLI statement that you can use for that. So this is just a command line statement. That's the AZTS create statement. You give it a name, you specify the location, you specify the resource group you want to deploy, you want to publish it to, a display name if you want to, a description. You can version it, and then you say which template file you want to use as for the template spec. Now, if you want to do this, so this is command line. Now, if you want to translate this, so to speak, to a GitHub Actions workflow, like David, there's not so much difference here, right?
No, you just it's YAML, right? So you need to be mindful about spaces, no tabs, but the inline script part is exactly the same. So in that case, we are just using Azure CLI action to process that AZ command with all the parameters. Yeah.
Yeah. So this is indeed the predefined Azure CLI task and the inline script, easy peasy. And like for the module publishing, we'll see something very similar, right? So if you use it, if you want to publish from the command line, there's the AZ bicep publish statement. You give it the file name you want to publish, and then the target. The target, this might look a bit funky because you need certain syntax here. But this is basically the container registry you will be publishing to. Now, this BR that people see, David, can you explain that one? Because that might that's a bit funky, right? It's like BR 2 points, and then the next part is like the name of the container registry.
Yeah. So the BR stands for Bicep registry, and it's just like a way you differentiate where you want to publish, because you might know that there is private registries that you can spin up yourself, and we will be using it in this module or learn module. But there is also a public registry. So and of course you can have multiple private registries. So what we also can mention is the fact that you can use so-called aliases in your Bicep configuration file to, instead of providing this long FUDN for your registry, you just can create those shortcuts or aliases and then just reuse them while you are declaring the usage.
Yeah. But that will only work when you're using the module, not when you're publishing it. But we'll come back to that as well, right?
There is a gotcha on that one. It is.
But here it's actually like the my modules is like the registry name, so to speak, as well. And then my queue is the name of the module itself. And the 2 at the end, that's like the version that you're publishing here. So, but now, like this is command line. And here again, if you want to do this from YAML, from a workflow, easy peasy again, right, David?
That is exactly the same syntax. Of course, here you can see that in this example we are hard coding so many values. In the real exercises, we are of course using environment variables to fetch the proper registry name, and of course we will also work with those versions or tags. So it's not really static. That would not be very useful. So we will in the real life we are not really hard coding many of these things inside the pipeline definition.
Exactly. And I guess that makes it time to start switching to the exercise. Like we've said, like the setting up of the environment, we've kind of shortcutted that one. But David will run you through what has been set up. But then the actual exercise will be about publishing a template spec. In this exercise, it will be a template spec, not yet a module. When we talk about the versioning, we also have another exercise, and there we will actually do the module publishing. So what you'll see in the exercise is we'll be creating a workflow, adding a linting job to it, adding a publishing job to it, and then verifying and committing the definition, triggering the workflow, and then seeing what it looks like in Azure, right? So I guess, David, it's time to switch to your screen so you can actually show that in real life how that is done and how people can do that, right?
Yes.
Perfect.
So first, let's start with a promised validation that my setup is according to what is the actual exercise 1 in the Learn module. So as you can see, I have forked this template repo that is coming from Microsoft Learn, toy reusable. So it's now in my private account, and I of course did clone that to my local environment, and I have this clone open in Visual Studio Code. You can also see if I do git remote, you can see that my upstream or origin is set to my GitHub, so I will be pushing directly to GitHub. And
this starter repository, it already has like a template spec and a module in it, right? So people don't need to actually write it. The code is already there, right?
That's of course true, because we said we won't be. This is not about writing Bicep code. It is more about how you actually enhance the workflow. So the workflows that are in this template repo are like a starting point, and we will be just expanding on it. So this is the GitHub part. Then of course what we need to check is my Azure environment. So here you can see I'm in the Azure portal. This is my application, and then if I go to certificates and secrets, normally we would be creating client secrets in the old days. And I remember when I was creating this learn module, this was the right approach. But now we are working with federated credentials. So as you can see, what I already did, I authorized my GitHub repo and the branch to be able to actually work with Azure. And of course, what I had to do as an additional step, I had to give permissions, or I had to do role assignment to a particular context. In this case, we're talking about this resource group. I will be using it both for publishing template specs, and I will also create a container registry, and I will be publishing modules to the same one. So if we check the access control, you would see that my toy reusable workload identity should be here as you can see it's a contributor, but only in this context of this resource, so in this resource group. So again, least privilege principle applied here.
And the big difference being that in your GitHub repo, you will not see any credentials, right? You won't see the password, you won't see the client ID. This is all contained within Azure Active Directory. Nobody sees the password.
Yeah. So the main, like you said, the main difference is that there is no like a secret, like this kind of long string. But we do still need some secrets, which is the client ID, subscription ID, and tenant ID.
Yeah, but it's like secret. It's secrets between quotes, so it's
right. So it could very well be an environment variable, which is something that was added to GitHub. I don't think it's a long time ago, but you're right. It's not like a secret. It's just a GUID, and all three are basically GUIDs. But we need them, right?
Cool.
Okay. So my environment seems to be ready. Mm-hmm. So let's jump into the second part, which is publishing template specs. Yeah. So first, if we look at the starter workflow, you can see that there is not much. It's just we have declared the trigger. So it will do a push on the main branch if there is a change in this specific path. But we also have a workflow dispatch trigger, meaning that I can run that workflow manually, and we will use it in this case. This section is important for federated credentials because we need to give that credential some permissions. And then we have some environment variables I will be referring to. So you remember the resource group, that's toy is reusable. Since I'm in Norway, I'm using Norway East, but you can use any other region. And then I'm just specifying the template spec name that will be used in this context, and I need to provide a path. So of course, that would be a very useless workflow if we don't have any jobs. So let me just quickly do the traditional cooking show trick. And I will
and this will also be a good moment, I guess, for because I see we have a question in the chat as well. It's a question from
Jan.
From Eamon. I have the one from we have one from Jan as well. I'll come to that one as well in a sec. But the question from Eamon is so if you have the AZ CLI statement, you can actually just copy paste the content of that CLI statement over into your YAML file, which is basically, that's correct. The one thing to take into account is indentation. Yeah, so spacing, very, very important here, that you take the right indentation. But apart from that, you can just copy paste it in. The thing is that Visual Studio Code, but also for GitHub Action workflows, you also have the online editor in the browser. those both will actually help you. If you make an error to indentation, they give you the red squigglies, and then you can correct that. So the moment you see red squigglies, you know something is wrong, and that you need to work on your spaces. That's the thing.
Yeah, that is true. And of course, one thing I mentioned as well, you can see that I'm using these kind of weirdly looking syntaxes. It's about not hard coding any values like we saw in the slides. Here I'm referring to like environment variables I'm declaring at the top of my workflow, so I can easily change them in one place if I'm reusing the same if I'm using the same parameters in many additional steps. So yeah, apart from this and indentation, you can pretty much run any AZ command inside your workflow as you would do in your own developer machine.
Yeah, and like you have in the workflow file, so this is actually the publishing of the template spec, but right above it, you also have the linting step, right? So it's actually two jobs that you have, one for linting and one for publishing.
That is true. So let's just quickly look at both. So the linting step, it runs on Ubuntu. We have a checkout, of course, and then it's AZ bicep build, because throughout the build, the linter will kick in. And based on how you declared the bicep config JSON, it could return maybe warnings, it could return errors, but you just need to run that AZ bicep build, and you need to provide a path to that file. So here we are, of course, referring to that specific template for Linux app service that we want to publish as a template spec. The publish step is running right after, and the reason why I know for sure that those two jobs will not run in parallel is because I'm stating needs. So I'm saying that you can run only after the linting is completed. And it's again login. So I'm here signing to Azure at this time, and I'm using those client ID, tenant ID, and subscription IDs from my secrets. So the federated credentials will kick in, and then I will just use the CLI action to publish the template. But you can see that the syntax is exactly how we did it in the command line in the slides.
Now, one thing you may also notice is on line 49, we're already using some magic to get a version number going for the template spec. So basically what this would do is each time you run the workflow, it would generate a new number, and that would then be a new version for your template spec, right? I think, if I remember correctly, if you do a rerun of the same run, the number would stay the same, right? I guess that's somewhere in the GitHub docs. If you do a rerun of the same run, then like if suppose something goes wrong and you need to rerun it again, that number stays the same. But if you do a fresh run, then it increments.
That is true. That is true. So let me now, if it seems that we are happy with the new version of my, I will just save it, and I will add it.
Oh, David, I love it that you do this command line. I have too many people clicking around in Visual Studio Code. I also love to do this command line.
Hopefully, we have pushed. So, what do you think will happen with on the GitHub side, Gita? Do you think we'll see some action running?
Yeah, well, the thing is, you did a push on main, but you also specified the path. Exactly. So I guess you will need to manually trigger this one.
That is correct. So this
only. I actually wrote the learn session on that one, so I should know. But sometimes I have doubts.
No, it was a tricky question. So yes, we need to use that workflow dispatch just to do the test run. But normally, if we were having the pipeline definition or workflow definition in the correct state, we would focus more on the bicep side. So every change we would make and push to main, which is of course not a good practice. We should have a pull request first. We would trigger this particular workflow. So if everything goes fine, it should pass the linting, and it should publish to Azure.
Cool. While we are waiting for that, we can now take Jan's question. So, and Jan's question is actually like he's asking like for someone coming from Terraform, would it be appropriate to compare template specs to composite modules in Terraform? Is that the case that it's close?
I'm not super versed in Terraform, but I believe that if a composite templates is a combination of individual Terraform modules, so it's like a collection of individual modules you can maybe deploy in one go, then I would say yes.
Yeah. The thing is, I do know modules from Terraform. I don't know exactly composite modules either. The thing is, Terraform modules as such, they are actually the same as Bicep modules. It's just a module that you then reuse. Yeah, the template spec, but that's the thing for me as well. I was hoping that you would know what composite modules are in Terraform, David, but I don't either. But yeah, that if the composite modules in Terraform are like a fully deployable solution, then you're good to go. Then it's the same thing, exactly. Thanks, Jan. Oh, this is awesome feature. I haven't seen it before on our live where people can even live tell us stuff.
Yeah, great. So it looks like we were lucky, and you can see that in my toy reusable resource group, I see the template spec. There is a version 5, so that should sort of correlate with the number of runs I did for this particular workflow. And then, of course, we can preview the actual template spec, which is surprise, surprise. It's not a Bicep code. It's ARM JSON.
Yeah, but we did push Bicep in there, right?
We did push Bicep, but it's in this way it's the same as if you were deploying that Bicep template to Azure. It transpiles it to ARM JSON, and then it does the deployment. So the ARM engine doesn't understand Bicep syntax natively. It needs this kind of step to transpile it to something it understands, which is JSON. JSON
yeah, that is a bit unfortunate, let's say, but yeah, that's basically how it's been built. But that's then also like someone consuming the template spec. That's what they would look at to see like, hey, what would this template spec actually do? What would it actually deploy, right? So cool. I guess that's the end of that first exercise, right? That's the things we wanted to show. So we can switch back to the slides. And we will talk to you a bit more on some good practices. And one of those will be versioning. David, why is it important to properly version?
Well, it is like with any other software dependency. Imagine that you build your code, your awesome Bicep template, and you are pointing to an external resource. In this case, it could be a Bicep module, and then you rely on the way it was written in the time when it was published. So let's say maybe that module has 5 mandatory or required parameters, and you specify the values for them in your main deployment file. What if someone creates a new version, but it overrides the current one with adding a new parameter that is required? That would make a breaking change for your setup. So it is important to distinguish breaking and non-breaking changes. And yes, we recommend to use the similar approach to versioning as it is in software development. So you're going to talk about that.
Yeah, and basically it's indeed like you want to know when something has changed to that template spec or to that module. That's basically the basis of it. Now, the way in which you then version, like there's knowing that something has changed. Next to that is knowing what has changed. And if that change actually has influence on your usage of that template spec or of that module. And that is where actually using a system in your version number starts making sense. And a good system that you may want to use is a system that uses major, minor, and revision numbers. How this is actually used is that the major number, you only change that one in case there is like a breaking change in your Bicep template. A breaking change might be, like you mentioned, David, there's like an extra parameter or a parameter got removed. That actually means then that people using that template, they will have their end of the code breaking because they need to add that extra parameter or they need to remove that parameter that suddenly went away. Yeah. So a major version number change is when a breaking change happens. Now the minor number, that one is used in case there is a change, but it's not really a breaking change. In this case, it's more like, there's maybe an additional optional parameter that we're now using. Yeah, so that might be an update on your on the minor version. So something got added. You are free to start using it, but we have a good default for this, so it will not actually break the change of your code. Or the usage of this code, right?
Yeah. And in addition, it allows you to sort of pin your configuration to a specific version, and you can test the new version in a safe manner before you switch maybe your production workflow to use that newer version, while you change your maybe input files or parameter files to address those breaking changes.
Yeah, and the thing is then like that the revision number, that's why you're making like backwards compatible bug fixes or other changes that won't affect the way in how the code works. Yeah. Sometimes you can be a bit flexible here. Like suppose when you're deploying multiple resources and suddenly an extra resource gets deployed, but that resource doesn't really need parameters, you might still treat this as a minor version number change or even a major number change. Sometimes it depends a bit, but like, yeah, the rules that we've given, those are kind of like the rules of thumb. So yeah, this is one way of versioning that you can use. There's also people using semantic versioning, which adds some more rules to this format. This is like the format with the 3 numbers, major, minor, revision, is relaxed enough to not get in your way, but also descriptive enough to be very, very usable. Yeah? And the thing is, you can actually do, like as a team, you might decide, hey, we're only gonna do, like, for instance, for the revision number, what people often do is for the revision number, we just use that GitHub run number that you've just seen in the example that David showed. And some teams might even decide, hey, we're not going to do major, we're not going to do minor, we're just going to use that run number and be done with it. But then you lose a whole bunch of like context to why a change was made or what a change might break. So actually adding those 2 extra numbers makes a whole lot of sense. The next question becomes like, how do you set this? Yeah, like setting major, minor, and revision in a lot of, like if you do regular coding, in a lot of those cases, it's like built in to your code. Like you have your config file, and the config file, that one has your version number in it. But how do you now do this for Bicep? Now, we came up with a system, and actually, well, I'm saying we, but actually, David, you and because you actually wrote this Learn module, you actually came up with the system together with the other person writing it, which is my colleague John Downs, which is using these metadata.json files. Like, can you talk us through it and what it actually does, how it's conceived, what's in there?
Yes. So when we are thinking with John about how are we gonna design that this system where you can have potentially several modules and want to use a single pipeline, or you want to have several modules in a repo with multiple pipelines, what would be the optimal way how you can handle that? So this system is, of course, one of many. You can design your own. But the idea here is that we really wanted to make sure that when the pipeline runs, it only publishes changed files, and then instead of somehow figuring out if that given pipeline run will somewhat have an influence on the actual version that you want to publish, we came up with the idea of adding a metadata JSON, a very simple JSON file with a structure like major, minor, revision. So once you make a, let's say in module 1, you make a change in the Bicep file, you change the metadata JSON accordingly. Major version, minor, is it just a small tweak? And then once your pipeline runs, it reflects the updated versioning that you have for that Bicep file coming from that metadata JSON. The thing is that in the ARM JSON template, we have something called like version, right, as a property. But in Bicep, there is no such a thing as a native one. Of course, you can use some metadata inside Bicep as well, but then you would need to parse it in some way. I'm not saying that you're not parsing. We are not parsing metadata JSON. We are doing that, but that was just a simple way how you can separate modules into different subdirectories, and then you can streamline your pipeline. So we can have a single pipeline in this scenario. We are not having one pipeline per module. You can have that, but then you need to maintain several pipeline files, which also brings some additional complexity or potential challenges.
Yeah, and actually, to be honest, I think there's actually a very, very elegant solution to that problem of the versioning. One additional thing you may do, and that, well, this may also answer one of the questions that we've had from the chat as well. I'm saying it may answer one of those questions. The question is actually, it's coming from Keyboard Warrior. So hi, Keyboard Warrior, which is, what if people increase that major number purposely to make it look like it's stable, and then they still do a whole lot of development on it, right? Well, that's actually not such a good practice to do that. The major number, when you change that, so that's also one of the things where a major version number change. So for once, it's for indicating there's a breaking change, but typically you also use that to say like, hey, this is now indeed a stable version, and we will not iterate too much on this anymore, and we will keep it stable. Like we will still do bug fixes, but basically we want to keep it stable, or as stable as possible. Now, to aid with that, or to help with that, in case your team is actually doing pull requests as well, when you're doing changes to those Bicep templates, to the template specs and to the modules, when you're doing those pull requests, in the pull request, the reviewers, they can also double check and see like, hey, but this is not a minor change that you're doing. This is actually like a major change. So you need to bump that major number. So that can actually help with that and getting into a stable state. But yeah, you still need to have the like the good practices around it to actually make it work properly. So so that's actually a good comment with that respect. Yeah. I also want to come. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead,
and
David.
Of course you mentioned like pull requests. So a peer review, you typically are not on this adventure alone. So you need to rely on other pairs of eyes that will validate whatever you are planning to publish is actually sound. And yeah, that could also address the issue with bumping up a major version if the code you're still sort of working on just to look good because you published a new major version.
Exactly. No, cool. One of the things there as well is, so you already mentioned it, David, is like, well, if you have this folder structure with the multiple modules and multiple template specs and each have their own version, then the question becomes, how many workflows do I now need to create? Do I create, and this is what you see on the slide actually, like this is one workflow specifically for the module one. Yeah, so you see it triggering on that module one path on the main branch. It is reusing another GitHub Actions workflow. Yeah, so it is using like what is called like the callable workflows in GitHub Actions. So it's actually calling that publish module.yaml workflow. But still, if you now want to do that for module 2, you actually need to do that again. So the only thing that has changed here is the path, and then like the path on the trigger, and then the path at the bottom of which Bicep file you want to publish. And then also you have that then for the template spec. where then the workflow you call is a different one. Yeah, so in this case, it's not publishing a module, but publishing a template spec. So there is a bit more difference. But still, if you have a lot of these template specs and a lot of modules, this might become a drag. Yeah, you might end up with a lot of GitHub modules. An alternative would be that you script this out. Yeah, that you actually you trigger on the main branch, but not on a specific path. You just trigger on the root path, so to speak, and then in your script you figure out, hey, but what file has actually changed, and then based on that, that's the one you publish, right? It might be a bit more complex, but it's in the end, well, lesser workflows that you have to follow up on, right?
Yes.
Do you see any other pros or cons to this approach, David?
No, like you said, it's you can use reusable workflows, so that's a great benefit, because the actual meat, what is happening inside the workflow is stored in one place. But then it also comes with, some people prefer to have some Bash or PowerShell scripts that can tweak and maybe based on some logic build that, like versioning and deal with multiple modules in a single repo. But again, this model that we are sort of showing in this learn module is just one way, and we thought it was just, let's start with something simple that works, but it might not necessarily address very complex scenarios that you
yeah,
have.
you can still extend upon it, let's say. Exactly. One additional thing you might also still do is when you're creating these template specs and modules, you might also publish them to different environments as well. So you might have a test environment for your template specs and then a production environment for your template specs. So people can test things out, and then they can use the actual production ready template specs in their own, well, in their own even test and production pipelines, because there might be a difference. You might still use a production one for your own usage of the template spec. So that's also one of the concepts that you can use that as well. And then one additional call out is that if you've watched those previous learn sessions on template specs and modules, and David already mentioned it a couple of minutes back, is there is this way of using aliases for template specs and for doing modules. You can do them, but that's when you use them, but not when you're publishing them. So just know aliases, you can't use them during your publishing process. There you need to use the full name. You can't take any shortcuts there. But that being said, I think it's time for the next and the last exercise, which is publishing now a module to a registry. So David, you'll be creating the container registry, adding the metadata file. You'll be publishing stuff, triggering the workflow, and then we'll see the module pop up in the registry. So back to your screen, and let's show them how it's done.
Yes.
Cool. Okay.
So the first step, really, you need to have a place where you store your Bicep modules. So we are gonna run ACR command to create such registry. I hope I remember to delete it. Otherwise, well, if it's the same name and the same property, it should just say it's done, and it won't affect my environment, because Azure CLI is idempotent. But in a second, we should see a new ACR popping up in my subscription.
Yeah, because basically a container registry needs to have a globally unique name, I guess, right? Yeah. So that's the reason why this might bum out. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But yay.
I was lucky that the name wasn't taken, and just note this name. I will actually copy that right away to clipboard, because we will be referring to that in the second workflow that we have in the template repo, which is module storage account. So in this workflow, we are simulating the actual publishing process for Bicep modules. So I need to provide that name, or that FQDN, and that should be correct. And of course, you can see that I'm using some environment variables like I did for template specs, so nothing is hard-coded. And for the jobs themselves, let me copy that over from my, where is it? Here it is. I have it nicely prepared, so it's rather long. So I will just copy, paste, and we'll go through that. Good. So we begin with linked. It's pretty much the same. It's actually exactly the same as we did for template specs. For publishing, it's a step where we depend on the previous job, and then we are checking out, logging in using the same federated credentials, and then the actual magic around getting the version number is coming through this script, where we are parsing that file, the metadata file with JQ, and we are sort of getting the right environment variable.
Yeah, that's some funky donkey JSON scripts.
Yeah, that's it's nice and simple, right? It's not a regex.
But it works. It works. It works.
It
Close to a regex.
Trust us, it works. So, and then of course the last step, which is AZ bicep publish, is just picking those variables, and it's deploying to that BR, which is my container registry, and it's providing the right version as a label, and then it's pointing to the file, which is in this case that storage account, the main file. Right. So we have the pipeline. I should save it probably, and then are we not forgetting about something? Yeah, we are. So I was talking about the metadata file, but we haven't created that yet. So let me add metadata JSON, and we will just paste the version, major, minor, save it. We should see two files that we want to add to our commit.
Yeah, still loving the command line. We've seen the audience loved it too, so and okay. It does give you more control over what you're doing. So
yeah, and I just love how it's colorful. So Z shell or Oh My Z shell is brilliant add-on to the terminal, and the update our workflow. Of course, I should.
Yeah, there is a sister session to this one that talks about Azure DevOps pipelines, but we chose to do the Learn Live sessions on the GitHub Action workflows because they are so much cooler. That's
oh shit! Sorry.
Oh, don't do swearing.
I think I did a mistake in the
in the quotes.
Double quotes.
I shouldn't talk to you when you're typing. Sorry.
Yeah, no worries. So I'll just do it in from here. Sorry.
That's how far our command line skills go on a Mac. That is.
Well, I must admit that I switched to Mac like a month ago. So
yeah. I feel for you. I can't work with a Mac. If they give me one, I might upskill on it, but I'm on Windows. But people say it's lovely to be on a Mac. So
it is. So as you can see, our second workflow is running automatically because we modified something in the path, which was that metadata file. Then
right. So now it is triggering automatically. Right. Correct.
Let's see if the publishing goes well.
And so the difference will be that in this case, it's to a container registry that we're publishing, right?
That is correct.
Cool.
So I'm expecting that once this is green, we should see.
It's taking some time on the
I
authentication, yeah.
should now see at least the container registry, which was created through the command line. I should see a new repo. Yeah, there is one.
Yay, so the repo is there.
So
that's that second part of the name when you publish to the container registry, right? So that's the repo name.
And then you see the 1.22.8. So
cool.
The first two segments we specified in the metadata file, and then the 8 is the actual run number. So it's that kind of patch or yeah. So our Bicep module has been successfully published.
Yeah. Now this is the manifest. Can you also see the actual Bicep code? Is that in the artifact tab or?
Nope.
No. Okay, we can't see that.
That's something that might be a bit annoying, but you can't really see that at least not through the GUI. I haven't checked if you can sort of get it other ways, but.
So then probably if you publish these modules to a container registry, you want to use proper naming. So the name really specifies what they do or what the module is about, right? Yeah. You want to use proper naming there. Okay, no, makes sense. Cool.
Yeah. So if I was really trying to be a good publisher, I would probably use tools like PS Docs to create some automated documentation and push it to some kind of wiki so people can really see this storage account Bicep module has these required properties. This is what it does. So I think it would be a good combination. And I can, of course, extend my current workflow to do such publishing of Markdown to some.
Yeah. Exactly. This the artifact reference on the left-hand side clickable, by the way? Like right under manifest, you have this artifact reference, but it doesn't seem to be clickable. No, you've hovered over it 2 times now, so I don't see. No, not the tab, but beneath. Yeah. Anyway. Yeah. That one. No, that's not clickable, right? Okay. Cool.
No, it's actually this is the reference, I believe.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it's the text box for that part. Okay. I thought maybe there was a magic button and we could still get the template, but it's not. Okay, cool. So I guess that's the demo for this one, right?
That concludes the demo. And of course, there is one very, very important step. If you followed along, then of course we created a few resources that might incur some charges. So be mindful to, of course.
Yeah, you're totally stuck. You can maybe, if you create a new shell, and you could do the delete.
So you need to delete your resource group just to stop being built for any. Well, the container registry was one resource, and for template specs, I don't think you are paying anything. But still, you don't want to keep some test resources running for a long time.
Mind the pennies. Exactly. No, cool. I think we can switch back then to slides. Like content-wise, we've done it all, and we have like 22 minutes left in the session. So that means we do have time for the knowledge check. So that's nice. That's very cool. So just to make sure that everybody understood what we were talking about and what we've explained. The thing is, the knowledge check, you can actually follow along with the knowledge check. So you can answer the questions as well. And I'll just try and get my screens right so I can see the answers coming in. So there is this aka.ms/polls out there where you can start answering these questions. Now, the first question is, you're publishing a Bicep module to a container registry. And while your workflow is running, it's actually failing. You get a failure, and the failure, it reads, there's an unhandled exception, Azure request failed exception, service request failed, and you're getting a status 401 unauthorized. Ooh. So question then is, why is that? What should you do to resolve the error? Should you A, now start using semantic versioning? Should you B, publish the module manually at the command line and not do it in an automated workflow? Or should you C, grant the workload identity permission to write to your container registry. A, B, or C? What is it? Now, David, what do you think about answer A? Do you think semantic versioning will fix this?
I think we talked about versioning for so long that I believe it's a solution to any problem. Just proper naming convention and versioning, and you're good to go.
Yeah, but it will not help you with unauthorized, right?
Not so much, no.
No. Doing it command line, answer option B, well, it will solve it, or it might solve the unauthorized exception, but it will not help you in automating the workflow, right? So I guess, well, I would go for answer option C, actually. I don't know for you, but C seems to me the correct one. And the thing is, we did do something right in this session because everybody got the answer right in this one. So everybody went for C. So yay, that's awesome. That's cool.
We have very clever audience. So
we have a totally clever audience. Awesome, awesome. Question 2 then. So let's go to question 2. Now, in this case, you need to test the resources that are defined in a Bicep module, and you choose to deploy the resources to your Azure subscription. Now, so this is about deploying the resources. What Azure CLI command should you use to deploy the resources to your Azure subscription? Should you A, use AZTS publish? Should you B, use AZ Bicep publish? Or should you C, use AZ deployment group create? Yeah. So David here as well, what do you think about answer option A? AZTS publish, would that deploy the resources to your Azure subscription?
It sounds tempting, but the question is, like you said, it's about the consumer side. So I want to consume something that was already published. So it sounds not so intuitive that this command would really fix that. So I wouldn't really go for option A. What do you think about option B?
Well, it's tempting to take option B. And I'm seeing that actually 50% of the people answering also went for option B. But I think they kind of got misled by the question that says like it's resources defined in the Bicep module. So indeed, then you would think, hey, option B, AZ Bicep publish. But like you say, it's about the consumer side. It's about actually consuming the module and actually deploying these resources to a subscription. So it's a tricky question. Let's keep it at that. I would still go for answer option C in this case. And of course, yeah, I do the module, of course, I do the learn module. So I know what the answer option is, but it's C indeed. So we've got 50% here, but I'll give the ones that went for the option B, I'll give them the benefit of the doubt because the question was asked in a very tricky way. So we should rephrase maybe the question on that one.
That is true. And I remember when I was creating the module, I got some guidance from the MS Learn team that the question should not be super complex, but not super easy. So that's something that was maybe a good balance. But yeah, I agree that it is a tricky one.
Yeah, exactly. And I do agree, by the way, it's a tricky thing to actually come up with good questions at the end of these Learn modules. That's also, it's an art to do that right. And I don't always get it right either. Third question, so third and last question for you. Suppose your team uses a multi-part versioning system. Which of the following changes to a Bicep file should result in a change to the major version number? Is that A, when you add a new variable? Is that B, when you add a new mandatory parameter? Or C, when you add a new output? So David, how about option A? What do you think? Is that applicable for a major version change?
So variables, as we know, are something like that is kept internal. It is not exposed to the consumers. And of course, if you are not careful and you declare that variable in a wrong way, you can use some sort of collection of maybe functions to create some value. It can cause a breaking change, but it's not really the purpose of this question. So I don't think that it would constitute a need to add a new major version or to publish it with a new major version.
Yeah. How about answer B, like adding a new mandatory parameter? I guess that would break stuff, right?
So the key in this answer is mandatory. So if it was a new parameter that had some default value, which is not a good practice anyway, it would probably, the deployment would pass, but then you would be in the mercy of that default value that you might not be really something you want. So definitely the mandatory parameter is something that the Bicep will expect you to provide. And since in the GitHub runner you cannot really interactively add the missing input, that would basically break.
Yeah, exactly. And hence it would be like a major version number change. So I would as well go for option B, like adding a new output, which is answer option C. That doesn't really break anything in your Bicep template. Like it's just an extra output that you can use or can ignore, right? So indeed, answer option B is the right one. And actually, let's say like, well, 90% of people got this one right. So that's awesome. That's awesome. I'm also very, very nice to see so many people voting for these questions. So cool,
Absolutely.
cool.
There is one tricky, like a sub question to that. What about removing an output? Could that constitute a breaking change?
I would say yes, because you might be using that output. So that's a breaking change, right?
Yep.
So, yay, I pass. Yes, 100%. Cool. So with that, I guess we can start wrapping up the session. So in summary, the things we've talked about today was about publishing those Bicep modules to private registries and to have those template specs published as well, and doing that in an automated way, in a way where you can verify what you're publishing, whether it makes sense, whether everything is still deployable. So actually doing it through those GitHub Actions workflows. We also gave you a lot of good practices for doing this. So I just hope that's like content-wise that you really like this session. In case you want extra resources, all the way at the end of the Bicep, at the Learn session, there you can find extra resources. They talk about things like semantic versioning, the principle of least privilege, and so on and so on. So there you find extra goodies. Also, don't forget, like, even if you didn't follow along through the with keyboard interaction with the module, even if you didn't do that, I do strongly recommend that you go to this specific Learn Live module or the Learn content on the Learn platform, and that you try out those exercises on your own as well, because it's through practice and it's by doing this that all of these things will start making sense. And yeah, just get that practice in, start using it, and then you can also bring this into your day-to-day usage of those template specs and of modules. Like, it's all good stuff that we shared here with you today. It's about reuse. It's about doing something once and then enabling a whole bunch of other stuff and deployments on the Azure platform. So that's the goodness that this session actually brings to you. I actually had an awesome time. I really love the content. I really love the session. So David, I know you wrote this content together with my colleague John. It's totally lovely content that you have here. So really liked it. Don't forget to tune in next week as well. Next week will actually be the last session of the series, right? So this will be the very, very last one. And that one will be about governing and controlling your Azure environment. Very, very important topic. Why? Because these GitHub Action workflows, they give you a lot of power. They are like a new entry point into your Azure environment. And you want to properly govern and control that, lock that down properly. Yeah. So that's why this session of next week is very, very important. I hope you all tune in again. David, I had a great time. Any last words from you?
No, it was awesome. It was my first Learn Live session, so definitely I had a lot of fun, and I hope our the people that were watching either live or will watch it from the recording learned something new and had some fun with us together.
Yeah. I loved having you on the show. And you did awesome, by the way. So great job. And everybody, talk to you next time. See you. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.